Hello and welcome to Graywood Gardening. It is early July and we just finally had a big rain most of the day yesterday. We got almost an inch of rain. And what's better, it took the temperature from in the 90s down to the 70s. In fact, it's in the upper 60s right now and it feels fantastic. I also realized that this is the perfect time for me to plant out the lettuce seedlings that I've been hardening off. I'm actually not scheduled to have them going out for several days, but it is cool and cloudy today, and it's going to stay cooler and cloudier for the next several days, so it's a perfect environment for the lettuce seedlings to get established before they get pounded with the sun and the heat. So I'm going to plant the lettuce here in this broccoli bed. As you can see, this broccoli is done for. The heat wave starting at the beginning of June was really rough on the broccoli. We did get a good number of broccoli heads harvested that we got to eat, and they were coming up at very different times. But then when the rest of them came up, they just immediately started bolting and flowering. These are gross and not really usable, so I'm going to pull all of this up, put a little bit of blood meal down to add some more nitrogen back in, and then I'm going to plant out all of the lettuce seedlings, which hopefully in 2 to 3 weeks from now will be something we'll be harvesting lettuce from. Now, of course, lettuce isn't a big fan of the heat, so hopefully it lasts for a while before it bolts. All right, let's get started. Right, bed is all prepped. Now I am going to get the lettuce planted. It is worth noting that lettuce is a cool weather crop, and lettuce does not love the heat of the summer. But lettuce is a lot better than true cool weather crops like arugula or spinach that just aren't going to grow in the summer. If you get the right variety of lettuce, it can grow. I actually have here a bunch of different varieties, so I'm going to see what does okay in the summer heat. I've also got some kohlrabi, and I actually have no idea whether that's going to grow okay in the heat or not. I suppose I could have looked that up, but I had the seeds, so I shoved them in. All right, so I think I might have actually planted too much lettuce again, but like I said, who knows how much of this lettuce is actually going to survive the heat of summer. So the one more thing that I do need to do is water this in, even though we got an inch of rain yesterday and the soil is very, very wet. I still want to water it in because watering your plants in isn't just about giving them water, but it's also about settling the soil around the roots and making sure there's no air pockets that can cause the roots to die. And then, I don't know, as long as the weather is this nice, maybe we should try to do as much as we can this morning, because this is lovely. This is the bed that held all of the lettuce this spring. I pulled everything up about a week or two ago to turn the bed over. I did direct seed some zucchini up here on this end of the bed and down on that end of the bed, which is actually just starting to sprout. In between the zucchini that I seeded, I'm going to fill the whole middle of this bed with bush beans. I'm going to use Provider, which I grew last year and worked out great. And I also have something called Jade. So I think I'm going to do half Jade, half Provider, and we'll see which one works out better, or maybe we'll just like the mixture. So I think I will do Jade on this half, Provider on this half. All right, and that's all there is to it. I'm now going to water this in, just like I did the lettuce. And then really, in just a few days, we should start to see these sprouting, because beans grow really fast. All right, we need to do a little bit of maintenance here in the cottage garden, other than the fact that it seems like there's always some kind of weeding to be done in here. We need to do a little bit of cleanup with some of our volunteers. So in addition to all the plants that we deliberately put in the garden, every now and then we have some volunteer plants that just show up and we decide to go ahead and let them grow. Now the best example of that is all of the milkweed that we have growing throughout the cottage garden. We like to let the milkweed grow in the back of the garden, but we'd like to pull up any of the milkweed that grows up in the front of the garden, or in fact grows in between other plants. So in addition to pulling up the milkweed, the one trouble-free volunteer we have this year is right next to the gas plant. We had a wild catnip plant sprout up, and we decided, hey, that's an herb, that seems very appropriate for a cottage garden. So we went ahead and let that grow, and it is blooming now. Catnip flowers aren't super impressive, but the bees absolutely love them. And on a nice day, this is just covered with honeybees. So my favorite volunteer that we have this year is actually right in the middle of the garden. We have a whole bunch of mystery squash. We're not sure exactly what kind of a squash plant this is, but we're pretty sure it's either mini pumpkins or some kind of gourd. Because last fall, Mrs. Graywood got a bunch of gourds and mini pumpkins and had kind of a Halloween treasure hunt for little Graywood. And one of them was rotting, and she's pretty sure she just chucked it into the cottage garden thinking that it would just break down. And of course it did, and then this spring, a whole bunch of little squash plants came up where all the seeds were left behind. So I decided that, hey, this front part of the garden is mostly stuff that we put in this year, so it hasn't really filled in yet. There's some open space. Let's go ahead and let the squash plant stay there and let it just vine throughout the garden. But there are a few too many plants right now, so I need to pull a couple of them up, and I need to make sure the ones that remain are vining toward open ground and not into the thicket of stuff in back. All right, let's get to work, pull some of this stuff out. I do like to first make sure there's no monarch caterpillars or chrysalis on it before I pull it up, especially for these larger ones. If there's a caterpillar, I'll move it on to another plant. If there's a chrysalis, then I'll leave the milkweed in place until the butterfly hatches. But these look good. Okay, so I'm leaving two plants here. We have a big one here, then I'm going to let the vine go out this way. There's a smaller one right here, and this vine is going that way. So hopefully these will go fill in some open space, keep them away from the really dense area back there and away from these poor iris that they were starting to vine around. All right, that's looking better. Still a lot of weeding to do, but I'm not going to go into weeding mode today. So I gotta get in, I need to wash my hands and wash these gloves because the milkweed sap is actually toxic, especially if you get in your eyes. So I wanna make sure I'm not leaving anything on my hands that might touch my face in the future. All right, that was an easy job. I wanted to give a quick update on the progress of the lower terrace garden here. Earlier this year, I direct seeded it with Rudbeckia and Echinacea, and some particularly attractive varieties of both. And so what I did is I put in these little tongue depressors to mark exactly where I put the seeds, so when all the weeds came up, I knew what was weeds and what was an on-purpose plant. So the germination has been pretty spotty. I do have a bunch of Echinacea and some Rudbeckia. The Echinacea seems to have germinated much better than the Rudbeckia, but also lots and lots of areas where nothing germinated. On top of that, weeding this area has been kind of a nightmare. Having these teeny tiny plants surrounded by teeny tiny weeds has been pretty rough. I think if I had to do it over again, I would actually have just started all of the seeds inside in the seed starting layer and wait until they were like maybe 2 months old so I had little plants, and then I would harden those off and plant those out. And in fact, that is what I'm doing now. So just at the end of June, I got the same Rudbeckia and Echinacea seeds, direct seeded them into a tray down in the seed starting layer, and got almost perfect germination in every cell. So it's definitely not a problem with the seeds. It's definitely not something that needs stratification or anything. It's really just the drought, the heat wave, how difficult it's been to keep this area wet, versus the perfect growing conditions inside. So hopefully those seeds that I started at the end of June will be large enough plants that I can plant them out, say, at the beginning of September. Fingers crossed, those will grow nice and fast inside, and I can transplant them out this fall and have this lower terrace garden be a lovely sea of autumn-colored Rudbeckia and Echinacea next year. Welcome to the seed starting layer. This is the Rudbeckia and Echinacea that I was talking about before, and as you can see, the germination has been fantastic. I wish I had started these about a month earlier, but hopefully with 2 months growing inside under ideal conditions, they'll be big enough to plant out at the beginning of September, and they'll have a good month to 2 to get established and hopefully survive the winter. But the reason we're down here is because now that I got all of the lettuce planted in the garden yesterday, now it's time to start the next succession of lettuce. So the lettuce that I planted out are probably going to take maybe 3 weeks before they're big enough to start harvesting. And then I'll be able to harvest them for 3 to 4 weeks before they bolt and turn bitter. It's a little tough to say they're going to grow faster and bolt faster because it's in the heat of summer. So if I start a new succession now, it's going to be about 4 weeks before I'm going to plant it outside, and then it'll be another 3 weeks or so before it's harvestable. So I'll be planting these outside just as I'm starting to eat off of the lettuce that's there now, and then hopefully these should be fully grown by the time the stuff that's out there now is starting to turn bitter, and that'll be like end of August, beginning of September, when the temperature should be cooler and hopefully the lettuce will last a lot longer. So I'm hoping that this is the last succession I'm going to plant. So first thing I'm going to do is wet this soil mixture down, this potting mixture. And then I'm going to plant a whole bunch of this stuff. Generally, when I'm planting lettuce mixes, I'm planting lots of different varieties of lettuce, different colors and different shapes and textures, just so it can make a nice salad mix. And I don't bother labeling what's what, because whatever looks good, I'm going to cut and eat. The one exception I'm going to do today is I am testing a couple new varieties of butterhead lettuce. So I think I'm just going to do 3 of each, but I'm going to toss some tags in, so I know these 3 is Merlot, these 3 is Adriana, so that I can also mark them when I plant them out and decide which I like better and which I want to use in the future. All right, and because these are all cool weather crops, we are actually not going to put it on the heating pad, but we will cover it to keep the moisture in just until stuff starts to germinate. So in a few days, that stuff should start popping up, and I'll take the cover off. And in 4 weeks, so in first or second week of August, we should be planting it outside and harvesting it by September. Okay, it is finally time to harvest our garlic. The bottom several sets of leaves have turned brown and yellowed, and the tops of the plants are beginning to yellow and turn brown, but at least 50% of the plant is still green. So this should be perfect. For garlic harvesting conditions, we want to harvest ideally sometime when the ground hasn't been watered for almost a week. And we're actually now like 5 days since it rained. So the ground should be fairly dry, and you want to harvest garlic if you can on a cloudy day. It is not a cloudy day, and there is no cloudy days in the immediate forecast, so I'm actually out here super early in the morning when there's shade over this part of the garden. All right, well, let's pull this out and see what it looks like. I'm being very, very careful here not to actually stab the garlic head, but to lift it up out of the ground before I pull it up. Okay, ground is still a little wetter than you would like. But that looks like a pretty good garlic head to me. You can see the definition of the cloves inside the paper. And it's not loose, there's no loose paper, it's filling it up nicely, but they haven't yet started to separate, which is what happens if you let them go too long. Alright, that is good enough. I'm just going to hand brush a little bit of the dirt off. I'll set this in my bucket, and let's get the rest of them up. So I was leaving the scapes on a few of these garlic so that we could see what it looks like when the head opens and you can see the bulbils. And I wasn't paying attention, and I just dug up 2 out of the 3. So fortunately we still have 1 left. But here's the interesting thing. Here are the 2 garlic heads that had the scapes on them. And here's the 2 that were just right next to them without the scapes. So you can see leaving the scapes on them gives you a distinctly smaller garlic bulb. I mean, it's still usable, you can still open that up and cook with it, but it's like half the size of the ones that were just right next to it that I had broke the scape off early. Alright, so here in the back of the seed starting layer, I have cleared a couple of shelves off this wire shelf. This is the perfect place to store garlic while it's curing. And the idea here is we just want to spend a few weeks to dry the garlic bulbs off. We want really good airflow around all sides of it so the wire rack works great, and we want to keep it out of the sun. Now you can do this outside in the shade, which is a pretty typical way of doing it, as long as it's someplace that's never going to get any rain on it. The basement works really, really well because there's no sun, and the humidity in the basement is much, much lower than it is outside at this time of year. So I'm just going to spread all of these out on the rack, and we will let them sit for probably about 3 weeks. And after 3 weeks, it'll be much easier to dust everything off and then get them ready to store. Alright, now I'm just going to let this sit here for about 3 weeks. After 3 weeks, it'll be much easier to clean everything off and then put it away for long-term storage. So, one thing that is worth noting is the garlic is good to eat right now. Like if I wanted to, I could do my best to get the dirt off, maybe even rinse it in the sink, and cook with these right now. The purpose of curing it is to get the garlic into a drier state so it will store for a long time, preferably for many months. Alright, well that is everything that I have for you on this video. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below, or you can email me at brian@graywoodgardening.com. Until next time, happy gardening. Since when do you like eating garlic?